Hello, I'm Sarah Watson, Director of the Murphy Institute at CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. I'm thrilled to welcome everyone to today's program, Building LGBTQIA+ Power and the 2024 Elections, a roundtable discussion with transgender movement leaders. This program is organized by the Murphy Institute and Student and Community Affairs at SLU, and it's made possible through the generous support of LaGuardia Community College and the New York City Council LGBT and Queer Caucus. I'm so appreciative to our speakers, Elisa, Tatiana, and Carlo, and our moderator, Laura, for making the time to be here with us today. I also want to acknowledge the public engagement team at SLU, Michael, Nadia, and Rose, for all of their work organizing and running logistics for the program. And thank you to our ASL interpreters, Elisa and Steve, who are here with us for the program. Following the conversation, there'll be an opportunity for audience questions, so please do use the Q&A function to submit questions throughout the program, and they'll be shared with Laura, our moderator. Today's conversation is moderated by Laura Flanders. Laura is the host and executive producer of The Laura Flanders Show, which airs on PBS stations nationwide. She is an Izzy Award-winning independent journalist, a New York Times bestselling author, the recipient of the Pat Mitchell, Lifetime Achievement Award for the Women's Media Center. Laura is also host of the SLU TV show CityWorks, which airs on CUNY TV. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody who is joining this webinar today. It is truly a pleasure to be with you, and I am joining you because I care so much from Adelaide, South Australia. So if I seem to be sweating just slightly, it's because the weather is high above 100, and the weather is hot everywhere. The temperature is up on our struggle for liberation as people on this planet. So I'm very glad to be participating in this webinar today. Yes, we'll talk about the elections. Yes, we'll talk about rising people power. But I think on the table here is the question of liberation and resistance and how we deal with this moment collectively and as individuals. We're going to be talking nationwide, citywide, and regionally. I'm going to be talking with transgender movement leaders. Why? Well, they'll explain, but I think you need go no further for a sense of why this leadership is so critically important than to look at the way that the radical right is targeting specifically trans leaders, the trans movement, trans people, and trans youth. If you look at the ACLU tracker nationwide of bills introduced in the last session targeting LGBTQ people and trans people specifically, you'll see that there are close to 500 such bills, which is something like a 3 times increase over just the year before. This is a community like no other that is under attack like no other. It is also one, I'm excited to say, that is resisting and fighting back and leading like no other. Leading with fury, for sure, leading with love as well. And you're going to hear that a lot, I think, from our panelists today. I want to introduce, to start, Tatiana Fermin, who is the founder and CEO of Bridges for Life. Tatiana, or Tati, works to help teens and young adults on the street and coming out of foster care to become responsible, self-sufficient, confident, and educated adults. She's also the president of the National LGBTQ Workers Center New York City chapter and serves on the center's national board as its New York liaison. We'll hear more about that in just a minute. Also with us joining from the West Coast is Carlo Gomez Artiaga, a longtime organizer, co-founder of the first Spanish language support group for Latine, trans, masculine, gender non-conforming individuals, Grupo de Apoyo Fénix, in the San Francisco Bay Area. Carlo is currently serving as the co-executive director for the Transgender District in San Francisco, a unique economic and people power development district in the Tenderloin, about which I hope we will hear much more. It's a model, as far as I'm concerned, for the nation. Finally, from New York, we have Elisa Crespo. She's a trans Latina advocate who has fought to promote civic engagement and elevate the LGBT community's voice in the halls of power all across the state. Prior to becoming the first executive director of the new Pride agenda, Lisa served as the education liaison to the Bronx Borough President's Office, and she made history by being the first transgender woman of color to run for public office in the Bronx. Three extraordinary leaders taking time out of important days of work to be with us today. We'll be talking for about an hour, and I encourage the panelists to jump in. Don't wait for me to invite you into the conversation, although I will have questions. And then we'll come to you in our audience and streaming at home to please pose your questions. We will do our best to answer them. But I'd love to begin, as I often begin at the Laura Flanders Show, just to kind of ground us. I said I'm in sweaty Adelaide, thinking a lot about the pressures we're under as a people on this planet, by asking each of you who or what is uppermost in your mind, on your hearts. Who are you carrying with you into this conversation today? And maybe I'll start with you, Carlo. Who's with you as we begin?
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, CUNY, and everyone who made this possible, along with my esteemed panelists. Right now, who's on my mind are a couple of people, two from the transgender community that we've recently lost, tragically, Righteous Torrance Chevy Hill, and also Next Benedict. Those are two people that are currently on my mind for two specific reasons that we'll go into later on. And then also I lost an auntie of mine, my godmother, this morning. So that's another person that's on my mind today.
Thank you for sharing. Tati, do you want to, may I call you Tatiana? Tati?
Yes, you can. Carlos, sorry to hear that. My condolences. So the person that I'm carrying in here with me today is Cecilia Gentili, a fierce advocate for the trans community, sex workers' rights, and was a prominent figure in many bills. I carry her in with me to help guide me as I talk about sex work.
Elisa, I'm sure you think of Cecilia also.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Laura. I absolutely am thinking of the ginormous life and legacy of Cecilia Gentili, who was a mentor to me and so many others. I am also thinking of Next, where more information has come out about the tragic loss of life that took place in Oklahoma. And I'm thinking of trans youth all across the country who are coming up in a time where there's an overwhelming sense of exhaustion and political and physical attacks on their lives. I'm thinking of the world that they're entering into is a different world, and perhaps their mentors or their parents or trans parents may have entered into when they were coming of age.
We'll be talking a little bit about generational shift. And I'd like to come back to you, Carlo, as somebody who's been in this movement for a long time, to talk a little bit more, if you'd like, about the two individuals you mentioned, and to talk perhaps about your sense of where your work stands. I think many of us feel that we're kind of on a precipice of big gains, but also big backlash.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Yeah, I think for us at the district, and then just in general in the transgender community, I think the attacks that we feel have been targeting our youth really, I think, hit to probably the most vulnerable community that we have. You know, according to the FBI, we've seen queer and LGBTQI kids being targeted. The increase has been 400% in states, especially that have anti-trans, anti-LGBTQI legislation. And so when I think about the young people, as my colleagues have said on the panel, it's heartbreaking because these are our most vulnerable folks. And the intersections of our movement with the safety movement in schools, school climate. These are the things that kind of come to mind right now, especially in a time where we are just going to see the climate just ante up and rev up against our young people.
Tatiana, you work with many young people coming out of foster care, among other things. Do you want to talk to us about them, about some of the people that you work with? I think a lot about the language we use in our media around gender affirming care or the denial of gender affirming care, and sometimes think we should just call it life-saving care, suicide prevention care. Who do you work with? Are there stories you want to share? And how did you start working with this particularly vulnerable population?
So back when I was living in New York, I was a foster parent to two little girls, and that's kind of where I grew my love for foster kids. When I say foster children, I'm talking about the whole spectrum, because when we think about foster children, we're thinking about DIFAS or ACS or the systematic, system. And when we're talking about,
can you just lay that out for us who aren't as familiar with the acronyms, Tatiana?
I'm sorry, say it again.
Can you just spell that out for us, for those of us who aren't so familiar with the acronyms?
I actually don't know the acronyms, to tell you the truth. If anybody in here knows it, they can help me out and put it in the text. But ACS, I know it's in New York, and DIFAS is actually in New Jersey. I don't know the correct acronyms. It's so funny. This is the reason why I hate acronyms.
So it's the Administration for Child Services, I think, in New York, and the equivalent in New Jersey.
Yes.
Thank you.
So when we're thinking about the foster care system, I think about it as a whole. The community. So many of our community are out into the streets, forced to have to search for chosen families. That to me is the foster care system. So when I say foster care system, I think of it as a whole. Unfortunately, the youth that I'm working with now, even though I'm so proud to be living in a state where every school is pretty much obligated to teach and be inclusive of LGBTQ history and education. However, there's still a gap with gender affirming care. If we see a lot of children that are out into the street with no support from their family, and unfortunately can't get gender affirming care until they reach the age of 18, unless they have support from a family member or someone that is like a parent figure or whatnot, which sometimes also makes it a little bit difficult if the biological parent isn't involved. So we're seeing a lot of depression within our youth, kids that are traumatized with everything that's going on. I feel that our younger generation sometimes are automatically just disattached, right, from political issues and just gender rights issues, because we're young, right? At that age, who's thinking about political rights or anything? You're just trying to survive. And unfortunately, as an LGBTQ adolescent, your main struggle and your main focus is staying alive or surviving or having a place to sleep, and having that support. So that's a lot of what I'm seeing in my community.
Elisa, you were part of bringing about an extraordinary study in New York State recently, looking at the experience, especially of trans people in the workplace. I don't suppose it revealed a lot that was new to you, but it was a first of its kind report. You were a big part of helping to make it happen. And I'm wondering if there are any other findings in that report that was recently released from the New York State Department of Labor that you want to share.
Absolutely. I also want to give credit to the New York Transgender Advocacy Group, another organization that was deeply involved in creating and drafting the legislation that was passed that led to this first in the nation report that covered the employment experiences of transgender New Yorkers. Some of the highlights that stuck out to me in that report, and as you said, Laura, were things that are not very surprising to me or the folks that work at the New Pride agenda, were that although New York has lots of very robust anti-discrimination protections, we find that there's not enough education, right? There's not enough cultural competency training being mandated by employers or in public health settings. And so the report finds that although some trans people are employed and gainfully employed, that the majority of trans people are underemployed or flat out unemployed. I think a lot of that is because of stigma and bias and discrimination in the workplace, as we know. The difference between, you know, our lesbian and gay brethren is that they get to navigate the world and no one quite knows that, you know, their sexual orientation. And that can be the case for some trans people as well. But there are many trans people that are visibly trans in the world, and they shouldn't have to, that should not have to prevent them from having gainful employment or being able to visit a doctor and get services just like anyone else. And so some of the recommendations from the report include passing legislation that would mandate cultural competency trainings as a part of an onboarding process for private employers. And we did something very similar for sexual harassment a few years ago in the workplace setting. And we're working with some of our partners in the state legislature to do something similar as it relates to the workplace. Another recommendation was to expand the fund that we spearheaded in honor of Lorena Borjas, who was a Mexican-American transgender leader and icon from Jackson Heights, Queens, who unfortunately passed from COVID complications and just the transphobia in the medical care system as in and of itself. This fund is a publicly funded program by the New York State, by the governor and the legislature, and it provides grants to trans-led and serving organizations. It has typically been for direct services and programs related to health and wellness, but we are pushing to make sure that this fund can be included into the Department of Labor so that we can provide workforce development programming and hopefully some trainings for people that provide for employers.
Elisa, as a follow-up to that, some people in our audience may have caught the New York Times article a few years back, I think 2019, profiling a woman who had transitioned, a trans woman who transitioned while she was an executive at, I think it was Goldman Sachs, a white woman with, she acknowledged a lot of privilege. The story painted a fairly reassuring picture of what it was like to trans in her experience. How is it different for people according to their race, gender, immigration, class status to transition at work? Just starting right there.
Well, trans people of color, Black and brown, queer, and trans people are at the intersections of multiple marginalized identities, as we know very well. So they're not only experiencing transphobia or stigma or bias, they're experiencing racial discrimination, classism, ableism, a number of isms that collectively really shut out our community from the private sector, which is why oftentimes you see members of our community working in the nonprofit sector, because oftentimes that's the safest place for us to show up and work and make a living. And so that's the reason why funds like the Lorena Borjas Trans Wellness and Equity Fund are so important, because each year we're finding that there is a need to expand the fund to a different state agency to tackle a different problem, whether it be housing, whether it be employment, whether it be health and wellness, direct services. So these are the experiences, not just of trans people, but trans people of color, the compounding intersectional marginalized identities. I think we're learning and speaking more about these things in the discourse, which I'm really happy about, because the fact is that when compounded, they do make life that much more difficult.
The statistics in that study were chilling. How many people had lost their jobs or been forced out of work or fired when it was discovered they were trans, let alone going through a transition while being employed. You mentioned housing, and Tatiana, I happen to know that you had the opportunity not so long ago to look for housing, to be in the position to be able to be applying for housing. What did you find? What were the challenges that you faced when it came to looking for houses, even when you had resources there in New Jersey?
Child. um, I want to say that that's when I learned that it didn't matter how much money you had. You know, me and my husband was lucky, and I had gotten a lump sum from a very bad, truck accident that I had gotten into back in 2014. So of course, like any other person, I would want to do something productive with my money. And I wanted to move and find something, but it felt like, oh my God, everywhere we went, it was the minute that they found out that I was trans or that I'm Black and colored, it was like so much hurdles that we had to jump over. They would request for us to make like 10 times the amount that they originally required. Everywhere I wouldn't get approved. Any place that I wanted to go, it seemed like we had to sit in front of a board, and the board was the one who had the decision on whether we was going to get the apartment or not, or we could buy it or not. I was devastated. I was literally, I remember it was like 3-4 months going into me literally just spending my money, with regular rent. And I'm like, I can't do this. Like, I need to own my own. And I had to just close my eyes and just pretty much buy it out. That was the only way I was able to own my place. It was buying it out in full. That was the only way that I got this place, buying it out in full. And I stood broke, unfortunately, but I own my place now. But it is very, very difficult for a trans woman to just succeed. Literally.
And we don't want to wish anybody the sort of accident that you had in order to be able to come into those resources. But moving to you, Carlo, I mean, I'm going to ask you to speak about the whole district that you're working with. I mean, people in New York area are very familiar with the Stonewall Uprising. They're less familiar with the Compton Cafeteria Uprising, which happened 3 years earlier. The district in which that happened recently came under devastating threat. Then what happened?
Well, I'll start off with the inception. The transgender district was established back in 2017 by 3 Black women, trans women, who helped organize community to come together to make this a reality, basically. Miss Janetta Johnson, Arya Saeed, our former executive director, and Honey Mahogany, who recently lost a very close election in San Francisco to be our local supervisor. And so these women came together. They formed, originally it was called the Compton's Transgender Cultural District, but really it's the first district now as an independent nonprofit. We're the first of the cultural districts here in San Francisco to formalize that status. We're the first legally recognized transgender district in the world, and we honor our trans ancestors who made it possible. The Tenderloin district is a district that has had historic organizing happening, including the Compton Cafeteria riots back in 1966, but also we have trans history in the neighborhood dating back to the 1920s. So part of our mandate is to affirm, to continue to create cultural spaces, cultural preservation of this history. And also not just to do that, we have programs that help stabilize. My colleague was talking on the panel, Lisa, and also Tatiana were talking about their situations in terms of their employment. I likewise, I lost my job when I transitioned, and I transitioned at a much later age, in my mid-40s, already having had an organizing career, advocacy career, and to go through what many of my colleagues, many of my trans siblings go through is not just incredibly destabilizing, but it really works against what so many of us work so hard to have, right? Our own kind of sense of self-determination. And so for the trans district, it's really important for us to provide not just the cultural arts programs that really give breath and really celebrate our transgender culture, but really to kind of stabilize and provide ideas and opportunities to really stabilize our community. One of the things that we are doing recently is a project to help stabilize rent by paying back rent that's due, maybe because of COVID and loss of work opportunities for many of our trans siblings that work in the service sector or the sex work industry or entertainment industry, lost a lot of availability to be able to sustain themselves during this time. And so for us, not only is our mandate to, again, promote arts and culture, this beautiful, rich history, trans history that we have, but also to create programs that really help our community maximize our resources in the city to be able to put forth our community in a better step than they were when they came in our doors. So another
And
aspect.
not to put too fine a point on it, but on a district that is rapidly gentrifying and was in danger
Incredibly.
of massive
Yes, San
development at the
Francisco.
point where those women came together.
Exactly. And so San Francisco is a rapidly developing, hyperized gentrification center. There are a lot of mechanisms and a lot of organizing that has been put forth by the city to help stymie some of the displacement. But of course, many of that damage has been done decades before. So for us, part of our mandate as well is to empower our community by creating public awareness campaigns, by also creating opportunities to address some of the issues that we see. So our Entrepreneurship Accelerator program is one of our most successful programs. It's helped over 30 individuals or 30 companies or entities be created by trans individuals or non-binary individuals who had a dream and want to see it through. And this is great for us because we do have a public awareness campaign around hiring trans folks. We want to make sure that one of the ways in which we can provide stability within our own community is to be able to hire our own, to be able to create those economic opportunities that for many of us, as Lisa and other folks have mentioned, have been closed to us. And so part of that is creating seed money. And so we have a lot of support from the city and county of San Francisco, from private and public funders that support our work. But we also want to expand these ideas beyond just the Bay Area or regionally or even statewide, like our Transgender History Month commemoration that we now are celebrating statewide here in California, the first state to do so.
I'm sure there are people in our audience who are hearing resonances with their own experience, whether it's in the LGBTQIA and broader queer community or in the labor movement. And I'm reminded of a comment that one of our guests on CityWorks made recently, Ricky Blum, who was one of the co-founders along with the late great Amber Hollabaugh of Queers for Economic Justice. And Ricky said, you know, if you don't have the state support, and if you don't have family support, and if you don't have the support of your workplace, you better have the support of each other. You better have community support to build power and to build legal defense. And place is so important in that. In the old labor movements, I guess we had labor halls and things, but this idea of place in gentrifying cities is obviously important in New York. Lisa, I know that the new Pride agenda recently established a place, a physical place that is going to be providing services.
Yes, it's the new Pride Agenda Empowerment Center. We are really happy to have our own space. I set out 3 goals for myself as the first executive director of the new Pride Agenda, and one of them was for us to have our own place. And so in September of last year, we moved in. We officially opened the doors in January of this year. And everyone knows the new Pride Agenda as an advocacy organization. That is our bread and butter. That is what we do really well. We've have long relationships that help us get things done and move things across the finish line. But what was really important to me and the staff that I've hired, given our experiences and the hurdles that we have overcome personally, is that we also create space for our community and be able to help meet some of their basic needs. And so we're doing so much more than advocacy these days. We have a number of programs around economic empowerment, health and wellness, civic engagement. We now have some limited direct services, food pantries, clothing closets, computer access, linkage to care, support groups, and just a hub for us to be able to organize and strategize and come together and figure out how we can continue to advance our movement.
Well, and that speaks to the new in the new Pride agenda. For people who are outside New York, who don't know the history, do you want to just remind folks why we needed a new Pride agenda? Wasn't there Empire State Pride?
Yeah, so the Empire State Pride agenda was founded, I believe, in 1990, the year I was born. And they were founded with the sole purpose to pass the Sexual Orientation and Non-Discrimination Act, which eventually passed in 2002. And what that did was it added sexual orientation to the New York State human rights law. And at that time, there was a lot of debate about whether the words gender identity or expression should be involved in that bill. And ultimately, the advocates of that time, which were largely more privileged, cisgender, lesbian and gay people, decided or capitulated and thought if they added gender identity or expression that the bill wouldn't pass. And so for 17 years on a statewide level in New York, trans people did not have the same rights and protections as their cisgender, lesbian, and gay brethren. In 2015, the Empire State Pride agenda dissolved and closed its doors and claimed mission accomplished. And so people got together, people that had been involved with the old Empire State Pride agenda, new emerging leaders, and they organized and they decided we needed to bring back a statewide LGBTQ advocacy organization. And so in 2019, the new Pride agenda was created and worked with a working board for a couple of years. This was the start and the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so in 2021, I came on as the first executive director almost 3 years ago, and we've been able to do an incredible amount of work in a short period of time. But yeah, to your point, Laura, when we thought we were done, at least those people thought we were done. People got comfortable, started to rest on their laurels. And I think one could make an argument that there's a connection between that sort of sentiment of mission accomplished, of marriage equality being the sort of pinnacle of our movement, a movement that I would argue was largely based on assimilation and acceptance. You can bridge that and make that connection to where we are today. And so part of what I am trying to do with my leadership and the new Pride agenda is to build a post-marriage equality movement in the Empire State that focuses not on assimilation and acceptance, but on economic, social, and racial justice.
Tatiana, is there anything you would like to add to that story?
No, I would just like to say that I feel that in order for us to build power and within a labor movement for our LGBTQ community, especially our trans community, we have to understand that stigmatized labor isn't going to help create power. And our community, unfortunately, doesn't have equity anywhere else other than the stigmatized labor that they have to indulge to criminalize labor, you know, in order for them to survive. I think we spoke on many topics. I think we touched on, the girls not having too much education, right? Not knowing their rights, not knowing their political rights, not having these spaces that are dedicating to educating our community and helping uplift them. We spoke about, we see a lot of people able to have different positions, but unfortunately, and I think my brother Carlos spoke to this the other day. Unfortunately, the transgender community and the LGBTQ community unfortunately had to fall victim to having to work as a service, regardless of whether that's doing sex work or working at Applebee's or working at Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks. It's always positions of service, and they ultimately still have to deal with the genocide that's going on behind closed doors that ultimately out them out and get them fired. We constantly hear stories of our transgender community constantly getting fired for the littlest, smallest thing. And it's literally because of who they are, because they started to transition, because they started to express how they want to be affirmed. They changed their name, or whatever it is that causes them to be outed out. We need to focus on putting people in position of power, leadership. My sister just Lisa said, ultimately we all fall into the nonprofit sector because that's the only thing that's out there that's helping empower us. For the rest of our community that gets fired and doesn't get accepted or hired into these positions because of who they are, there's another job that pays them and values them simply for who they are, and that's sex work. For many girls, that's the first time they ever felt validated, pretty. That was the first time they ever told their body is beautiful. That's the first time they was ever validated as a human being. So it's evident that sex work is always going to be there, and we need to understand that sex work is real work, and that unions and labor justice groups need to understand that and make it part of their analysis, because if not, we're never going to proceed.
I mean, the frustration that you are all expressing and that I share when we think of how far our movements could have come if they were truly inclusive and liberatory from the start, is where we find ourselves again. At the same time, I think, and I'll come to you, Carlo, there are signs, for example, in the labor movement, that the leadership of trans organizers and activists is so obvious as to be being recognized. I'm thinking of the Starbucks strike, the Starbucks organizing efforts. But I wonder, or my question to you, I guess, is, how real do you think the consciousness is? And where do you think we could see growth, or how, I guess, is the question, could we, in the labor movement perhaps, be stronger allies to our colleagues in the trans and gender non-conforming, non-binary community?
I think standing behind, even just a simple act of just standing behind your coworkers. I can't tell you how important that was for me when I lost my position at a nonprofit in East Oakland based on a restructuring that was really about not wanting to address me by particular pronouns and the difficulty that came about that. So solidarity in the workplace is one, I would say is top. And also just to acknowledge the leadership of our trans and LGBTQI siblings in different sectors of organizing. Labor definitely is a place where we see many of these Starbucks baristas who risked their jobs to be able to have better working conditions. Across the board, the solidarity that took to be able to accomplish was immensely important for our community. I would say also just making sure that there is opportunities to even apprentice. I know in California, we were thinking about possible bills around supporting trans and non-binary individuals to go into the trades, into those areas of work where you might not need high school education or even college education for some apprenticeship programs. But there's also opportunities for us in other areas and other sectors. For example, we have a colleague, Eddie Pizarro down in Florida that's having the first Trans Tech Conference, providing individuals an opportunity to find out more about how one can get certified without having to have a degree outside of the certification to be able to get an alternative type of job. And so just providing opportunities for our community to be able to advance, to be able to learn, to be able to organize, to be able to unionize. Those opportunities, I think, are immensely important at this time at every level and in every community across the board for trans folks.
Tatiana, would you want to add anything to that? I mean, I feel duty bound to say it's not that trans and non-binary and gender non-conforming people are born less well-educated or poorer. They just tend to be excluded from educational opportunities or made so uncomfortable that they leave at higher rates, and similarly rejected from their family situations at a higher rate, not to put too fine a point on it. What would you say, Tatiana, to that question of how we in the broader social justice movement could be stronger allies?
I think by supporting spaces where people can learn and educate themselves at a higher rate, retreats, findings, doing work online, workforce, skills within the sex trade and out of the sex trade, be more inclusive. I would say I would add to that. And going out, going
At least
going the extra mile. I feel like when we're working with our LGBT community, we have to go that extra mile sometimes, and just thinking out the box.
at least New York is a state to which many people are coming, always have, seeking liberation and safety, like California or some parts of California. Some parts of New York have been magnets. We also have a massive in-migration opportunity. And no one is struggling harder in that migrant population, I think, than particularly trans women of color. What are you seeing? What's working? What's not working? And what needs to be the next level of legislation to protect and make our communities safer for everyone?
Well, I would say on the topic of immigration, we need the federal government to get its act together. We need comprehensive immigration reform. And the tragedy of divided government is that you can't get any big policy work done. And so I want us to not take our foot off the necks of our Congress members, our senators, and the people who get paid with our taxpayer money to solve these problems. New York City has seen, I believe, 180,000 migrants over the last 2 years. Probably half of them have stayed. There's a large community of queer and trans people who are part of that migrant population. We are seeing them visit all of our centers throughout all of our boroughs seeking services. We certainly have seen them in the past few weeks visit us for services that we offer at our empowerment center. And I think New York City's done a decent job, minus the politics, minus the people in power. The fact is, we have been able to sort of manage what is being called a crisis, and I guess it is sort of a crisis. New York City provides shelter to anyone that goes to an intake center and says that they're in need of it. It may take some time, it may not be adequate, but they will and they have to legally find you shelter. And I think some people will argue that's part of the reason why people are coming, but it's the spirit and it's the DNA of New York City, right? It's New York City is a true melting pot, and people from all walks of life and different experiences are what make New York, particularly New York City. And so it's been a challenge, but I think that we'll be able to continue to manage. And I think, we really have to understand that no human being is illegal and that borders are imaginary lines. And I think that our federal government really needs to get its act together.
Carlo, you're nodding your head. I don't think San Francisco was made by Silicon Valley workers. What is it that makes a trans-friendly district, a trans-friendly city, community, state, world? What's it look like? What's it feel
Well,
like?
it's a lot of organizing for sure. It wasn't given to us. Nothing's really given to us. So we definitely had to organize. And that meant Janetta, one of the founders, going and recruiting people, whatever time of day, to prep them, to go give public comment, to really talk about the need and the importance of lifting, one, the history of our people, two, the opportunities that the district could create. Like the district is just a tool, so we really have to organize ourselves to be able to create those spaces and those places and those opportunities. One of our programs that we have is a social justice fellowship, in which we help folks that want to make that professional switch, or maybe that just sector switch from maybe service sector work or sex work to something else. And so part of that is then creating pathways that are individualized for those individuals to reach and meet their goals. But a lot of that takes support from not just the city of San Francisco, not just the county of San Francisco, but really organizing to make sure that we have longevity, that we have opportunities outside of the region, because our trans community is very transient. They'll go from one area to another area, or because of housing instability, are forced to. And so this is what we're seeing in terms of some of the issues, some of the problems in California for our community. But we also are seeing a huge number of trans and non-binary refugees coming to the city and county of San Francisco as well, partially because they're escaping or leaving other areas where there are anti-trans legislation, or there's threats to their health care or health access. So we see this in the city of San Francisco, in the county of San Francisco, but there's also tremendous backslash to that. So that looks like potential propositions that are very specifically aimed against trans youth, trans services, trans healthcare, that sort of stuff. And so we see also large growing amounts of extremist right groups coming into local school boards or school districts to organize against trans youth, and all the hard work that many youth activists, LGBT activists, trans activists have worked so hard over decades to get to. And those rights and those areas of gains are being eroded every day. And so we need to reinforce, we need to build up, we need to really reach out to our allies, but also organize within, and making sure that we have coalitions, that we have alliances that are strong, that are healthy, that are actually working towards that systemic change we need.
I want to just remind people, thank you, Carlo. We've got about a few more minutes. We'll keep talking. If you have questions, don't hesitate to use that Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom webinar window to pose questions. We have a few. We would love more. Tatiana, coming to you, Bridges for Life started, I think if I have it right, after you had distributed money to people on the street, to working girls on the street, just trying to do something. You ended up institutionalizing a program. Do you want to talk a bit about what Bridges for Life does and how it relates to the Workers Center, if it does?
Okay, you did some research. So originally we had started, you're right, actually giving money to girls in the street. Oh, it's kind of, don't want to get emotional. This part of my job kind of like touches me, because I felt like I was privileged and I needed to do something for my community, which is one of the reasons why I do the work that I do today. Because, you know, for all so long, I lived behind the shadows of a cisgender woman, and I was comfortable doing that because that's like the most safest place for a transgender woman. But once you know the reality of having to, you know, stand up for your community because our elders that was doing it before are dying, and then once they're gone, who's left? You know, so we have to kind of like, you know, take the willpower to move forward and create the job. And I wanted to do something for my community. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know anything about this nonprofit work. I didn't know, you know, I've been working with nonprofit work since 2008. I know how to be, you know, a patient navigator. I know how to do the work. I know how to advocate, but I didn't know how to be, you know, a CEO. I didn't know how to start an organization. I didn't know what to do. But one thing that I knew was that I was tired of working for organizations that wasn't centering the lives of Black trans women. And that we ultimately kept falling into an umbrella, you know, the LGBTQ umbrella, with fundings in organizations and whatnot. And ultimately the T in the alphabet gets the short end of the stick, not necessarily because, you know, the organizations aren't out there supporting them, but because they're not catering to their lifestyle. You know, by the hours of 9 to 5, the girls are sleeping at home because they just got in from sex working all night, trying to survive, and ultimately don't get a chance at you know, getting these services that these organizations have for them. So I wanted to do something. I didn't know what, but the closest thing I knew was, you know, I was sex working. I knew my sex work community, and I knew that they needed help. You know, through the midst of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and then COVID, all of that, while everyone was getting COVID relief funds and whatnot, the sex working community was struggling. They wasn't able to see their job because everyone was scared of dying and catching COVID. And so was the John. I didn't know how to help. So I started off by giving money to the community, like just going to the hostros and going to the spots where I knew the girls was working. And, like on a rainy day or on a snowy day or whatever. And, I kind of like scan out the person who I felt like was struggling the most. And I would ask them like, hey, if I give you $200-$300, would you go home? Would you go home? But that'll be enough for you to go home today and not have to go through what you're going through right now. I didn't really know how important that was. A lot of times I felt like, and still today, a lot of times I feel like the work goes unnoticed. I question myself, am I wasting my time? Should I just be living my life? Is it really making an impact? And I was at this event. Years later. I think it was Gia Love's cookout, as a matter of fact, and amazing cookout for trans liberation and trans individuals. And I was at the cookout, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, Tatiana, there's a girl over there that wants to talk to you. She said you helped her out in the past." And I'm like, "Who's this girl? I don't know." And I walked over to the girl, and she's like, "Hey, do you remember me?" She was like, "You came to me one time in Fort Monroe." She was crying. She said, "You gave me $200, and she was like, you was like a life-saving that night." And, she was just in tears and telling me what she had went through and how I was able to bless her with that. And that made me feel so good. That made me know that what I was doing mattered and the work that I was doing for my community was appreciated. I try to, of course, we service the community that's coming out of foster care system. So obviously, evidently, every program that's within my organization is kind of like with a mom instance type of feel. I think about the community in the foster care system. What are the things that you learn? Most of these kids are in houses that, with parents that pretend they love them and that they believe these are my parents. And then at the age of 21, once there's no more money coming in, the first thing that happens, or the first time you get arrested or for trespassing or smoking a joint in the back of a school or something, now it's like, oh no, that will not be happening in my house, and outside you go. There was a study years ago. I forget exactly what year, but I think it was like in 2008. There was a study where 68% of the homeless people that was actually in the street, and not people that was like couch benching from couch to couch, but literally the people that are sleeping, under the bridges and tunnels, the people that we probably wouldn't sit next to on the train station. 68% of that population aged out from the foster care system. This is because I'm 40 years old. I just realized and figured out what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, which is service my community. Abraham Lincoln didn't know what the heck he was doing to the age of 45. I say that to say that at the age of 21, we're not thinking about, our future. We're just living. We don't know what we want to do. So sometimes when we're in the foster care system and then we get outed out into the street at the age of 21, you're outed out with no knowledge. Literally, and we all know that the worst hood to manage is adulthood. So, I try to bring that type of feel. Like, there was another study that shows that, only 35% of the LGBTQ community had a driver's license, and the ones that did had it well after the age of 35. I was like, that's ridiculous. When we have teenagers at the age of 16 driving to school, that's ridiculous. So I feel like, we have a TGNC driver's course program, and I'm so thankful to say that like almost 10 of our clients already have gotten their license. And I feel like with that program alone, I'm breaking a barrier just because of that study that I know about.
Right.
So, that's one aspect in which I try to tackle the community in the aspect where with things that I know that they would have learned at home. At home, when you first start to drive.
Well, that's really helpful, Tatiana. Really helpful. I really appreciate that. And it reminds us how close up help can often be, how immediate the help can be that we can provide. I'm now going to jump to the furthest possible extreme, which is national elections. You mentioned politicians, Elisa. I don't think anybody on this panel thinks that elections are the be all and end all of our liberation struggle, but we are in a big national election. And if you turn to the right for a second, from the the loving kindness of Tati, I hate to bring up the Heritage Foundation, but if you turn to their 2025 project, which is a program for the first 180 days of what they imagine will be a next conservative administration under Donald Trump, you see when you turn to the Labor Department, the labor work, the work they would like the Labor Department to do in those first 180 days, all of it has to do with repealing anti-discrimination legislation, including the few trans protecting pieces of legislation we have for federal trans workers. So they're clearly putting this community, our people, front and center. What do we need to be doing this election season? And how are you at New Pride Agenda? And I understand all the organizations represented here are nonprofits and nonpartisan. Electoral work is not your bread and butter, but how are you working with people? How are you thinking about this election year, Lisa?
Well, I think about it through the lens of New York and what we have going on the ballot on the general election in 2024, which is an opportunity to amend the New York State Constitution it's called the Equal Rights Amendment ballot proposal, putting the rights back into the hands of the people and not politicians. New York has probably one of the most comprehensive, inclusive Equal Rights Amendment ballot proposals that will be on the ballot in November 5th, if I'm not mistaken, of this year. And it will include enshrining the protections of birthing people, of people based upon sexual orientation, gender identity, disability, you name it, and protect people from discrimination on part of the government, very specifically. And so the New Pride Agenda, we are working in coalition with New Yorkers for Equal Rights to persuade not just our community, but all New Yorkers, as many people as possible, to vote yes to amend our state constitution. We do not know who will be in power in the future. New York came very close to having a conservative governor not too long ago. And we don't know what we kind of do know what their agenda is. And so there's reason to be concerned and to enshrine protections into the state constitution. I think nationally, I would like to see people on the left match the energy of people on the right. I think, Biden for the past several years has been telling trans people that he has our backs. And someone once recently said, we're still waiting to see how Biden has our back specifically. I think that the federal government's inability to pass the Equality Act is a clear demonstration of them being derelict in their duty, when in 30 plus states in this country, you can marry whoever you want, but you can be fired or you can be evicted rather, or denied services based upon your gender identity and expression. Is just a joke. It's a joke that people would prioritize marriage equality over the Equality Act in 2023, in my personal and humble opinion. I think that we know rather that there's a well-funded, well-coordinated effort on the right to eliminate transgender people from public life. And they just are organized. They're all equally wacky, and they are thinking strategic and long term. And here we are on the left, afraid to utter the words transgender, or afraid to lean in and be unapologetic about our support for people, regardless of how they identify. There is a massive movement that is based upon women and children that has proven to be extremely effective on the right in getting people to believe things that are not true. It is the basis for the attack on gender affirming care, which is, as we know on the call, supported by every major medical association in the United States. And so I think that folks on the left, I would love to see our president, I would love to see our senators and Congress people, our House of Representatives, be bolder on their agenda for LGBTQ rights, for the rights, for reproductive rights, for immigrants' rights, and learn how to call out the right for what they are doing, which is moving our country backwards. So we say every year that this is the most quintessential important election of our lifetime, and every 4 years, rather, that seems to be or feel true. And so I'm very, very concerned about what will happen at the White House in November.
If people want to get a very clear picture of how the right is moving its campaign against abortion and contraception into a campaign against trans lives, let alone trans healthcare, Imara Jones's podcast, Translash, is one I truly recommend. Encourage you very strongly to check it out, people in the audience here. Carlo, how are things looking from California? A more contested state, well, like New York, a more contested state than many people imagine, many Democrats at least imagine.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of Proud Boy organizing at the local level that is organizing really intently with a lot of very conservative viewpoints. And it really reminds me a lot, I'm a little older on the panel, but I remember Susan Farr came out with a book back in like the 90s called In the Time of the Right, which talked a lot about how in the 80s Reagan administration tried to pass the Family Values Act, and how they promised that they would break it up into small bills and work as long as they could to pass it in small portions. And to this day, they are still working on those same things, right? So whether that's the case in Alabama around in vitro fertilization and how that affects all of us, including trans people, or whether that's an attack on our guaranteed income program, coming out of COVID, our community suffered, as Tatiana was speaking to, so much hardship, being as their livelihoods were basically erased. All that entertainment industry, all the basically service industry jobs that were once available were no longer. And so these are the kind of programs that keep our people alive, literally alive. And I think that it's a time for the Democratic Party, and I'm speaking now as an individual, as a U.S. A citizen, that it's time for the Democrats to go all out for the trans community. We are the wedge issue of this generation, and if we cannot protect the most vulnerable of our community, then I think we need to shift that power to vehicles that can. Because our young people and our elders have no safety net, no support. We are seeing people drop out of schools because they don't feel safe going to schools, whether it's school shootings or hate crimes towards LGBTQ kids. We see the conditions worsening. And so I agree with Elisa, I agree with Tatiana. I feel that this is a incredibly important time to organize, but it's the solution is not going to come from the top. It never has, and it never will. And we have to push it from the bottom. And that means organizations like my organization align with organizations that do that electoral-based organizing work, moving beyond then just these strategies towards strategies that are really going to build power and change systems. Because when a Black trans woman is able to be housed and not have to worry about where her next meal is, that will benefit all of us. All of us, all our conditions are raised by that, by those opportunities. And so whether it's foster kids, whether it's trans folks getting support through UBI, Universal Basic Income programs of that sort, these are important fundamental programs that will lift and change lives. And the more those lives are changed for the better, the more our communities will be as a whole.
There are some great examples of intersectional organizing, and I can't help but pitch an interview that I conducted with Suzanne Farr, a prophet of our movement, on the Laura Flanders show a few years back. You can find that in our archives. And I do encourage you people who are on this webinar to check out the chat. You'll see links to the podcasts and books and programs that we've mentioned. Tatiana, coming to you, elections. How do you think about them? How are you engaged with them? Particularly this one.
everything the other panelists said, right? My brothers and sisters. However, I feel so disconnected. I am feeling so disconnected from the elections. We are still fighting for transgender rights, for transgender liberation. We're still fighting for sex workers' rights. We're still fighting for undocumented folks. And it seems like with these over 500 legislative bills literally aiming to attack us, I feel that even under Biden, we're still being attacked. So I don't know what the election calls for and what is coming up for us. However, I do know we do not want Trump. And yeah, that's what I have to say about the election.
To some extent, politics, I mean, it does. I mean, I was thinking about New Jersey. Bill Murphy has done some good things.
Yes.
Seems to me.
And I urge every state to mimic the governor out here in New Jersey. Phil Murphy definitely sign an executive order and make your state a safe new haven for LGBTQIA.
We got a few questions. Thank you for that. We got a few questions from our audience. One is, what helps drive the work that you do, and what recommendations do you have as trans movement leaders for new trans activists coming up in this generation? Tatiana, you want to start?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
So what drives the work that you do, and then what advice do you have, or what recommendations do you have for new trans activists coming into the movement today?
For new trans activists coming into the movement today, I would say to seek collaboration. This is a work that you can't do on your own. The more people involved, the more you can learn, the more connections you make, and the more opportunities you're able to give to your constituents and the people that you're actually servicing. Definitely, when you're doing this kind of nonprofit work, you have to be knowledgeable and resourceful. And you can't be knowledgeable and resourceful if you're doing this on your own. So definitely collaborating with others, getting connected with other organizations that doesn't provide the same services that you provide. That way you're able to actually help out other people that are in situations that you're not able to help. And the drive, as I mentioned earlier, just knowing my privilege, I feel that many of us, our appearance is what sometimes holds us back, and it's, pretty messed up. But unfortunately, the more passable you are, the more easier you are on the eye, the more chances you have of being able to sit at a table and actually have a conversation with someone that's actually listening to what you have to bring to the table, and not focuses on the fact that you're 7 foot tall with broad shoulders and a pencil skirt with halter top. That right there is what holds many people back from allowing us to sit in these positions and to be able to grow. So I feel like I knew my privilege, and I decided to stand up and not hide behind the shadows of a cisgender woman. I said, you know what, I'm a transgender woman, I'm proud, and I'm standing up for my sister. So I wanted to give people a voice that didn't have a voice for themselves. So that's my drive. And just to see my community grow, I hope and pray that we are all able to grow and be resilient and just be able to live authentic lives.
Lisa, I'd love to hear your answer to the same question around recommendations for new leaders, but I have another question for you, which is, will you run for office again?
Well, I have no plans to do that at the moment. What drives me? I think a lot of us have been called to do this work. I think there's certainly a level of privilege that I think has enabled me that I've tried to use for the greater good of my entire community. I think that this is certainly a time period where there's a need for all of us to show up, to speak out, and we can do that in many different ways. My advice to young or up-and-coming trans leaders, advocates, activists is, you don't have to always be in advocacy. You have a right to live a soft, peaceful, normal life. And it's okay for you to do that too. And that is also a contribution to our community, because doing this work for several years, I find that it is physically and mentally draining and exhausting, the over politicization of trans people, the fact that trans people are the pathway to the White House in 2024 is just, absurd. And I think that we can really dwell on it. And I think that if we do that too much, we will deprive ourselves of the joy that we deserve as human beings. And so I just want to remind trans people that it can feel like just being trans means being a calling into advocacy and activism. And that's not the case. And I think that if that's for you, then great, do it. But if not, there are so many ways that you can contribute to the advancement and the betterment of our community. We need to be in all circles and spaces, in the front and the back, inside, outside, all of it. And I think that the interesting irony of the work that I do is that what I think about most is living a peaceful life in the Caribbean somewhere in a small little tiny house that is like off the grid, self-sustaining. That's my dream. And like, if I can accomplish that, then I will feel successful. So, but as I said, like a lot of us are pulled into this. It is a calling. We do it sometimes not by choice, but by necessity. And I've always wanted to do more good for more people and use my voice for change. So I've found a way to do it in many different ways.
I think you felt us all exhale at the idea that we didn't have to work so hard all the time, and that we could all come visit you in that little house in the Caribbean. Look forward to it. Carlo, we have several questions coming in about intersectionality and intersecting, especially the trans liberation movement with the disability justice movement. But one also just came in around the history of LGBT and community allies, including labor leader allies. And I'm reminded that San Francisco has a rich story of collaboration between the longshore workers and the trans community and the queer community. And that there is that history to dig into in so many of our places, history of collaboration that's been buried as we've been told this story and lived this experience largely of separation. So go with that where you will, but those are some of the questions coming in.
Yeah, I mean, the longshoremen have in the union has supported many progressive movements, including the current ceasefire movement that's happening. So that in of itself, I think, is definitely a call towards other, both union, non-union, worker centers from across the way to educate yourself around trans rights and trans visibility at the workplace and making workplaces safe, because those early institutions, the schools, are places of employment. These are critical places for us to be able to thrive and survive. And without safety, without support, without understanding, and without a responsibility of the employer to do that, to make sure that their staff and their company or entity respects those things, I think that we need that right now in our movements. I think we need solidarity in many levels, much of what we're seeing across the board. And so I have a lot of hope, even though there's a lot of bleakness. And I think what drives me in terms of what helps me move forward is really thinking about all my trans ancestors and all the LGBTQI organizers and heroes that are nameless, that to this day people don't know about. And that's why the trans district and organizations like ours are important, because we make sure that our history is not forgotten. We document that history. We make sure that it's accessible to our community, and we make sure that we provide safe spaces for our community to come together and learn and perpetuate that history. Because without us knowing our history, how could we move forward? So that's what I would say for me, it's my drive. And I also echo what Elise says around making sure that, many of us don't reach the age. I'm 50, I just turned 50 this past year. Many of us don't reach this age. And so for us is understanding that we need to be there for the long haul, and show that as well as a model for our young people, that there is beyond survival, that we have and we can live a long life, a healthy life, and a prosperous life when we give to our community and we give back.
Tatiana, I don't know if there's anything you want to add, but I would love to hear it if there is. And if you want to address this question of the intersection between trans liberation and disability justice, I think that's something that is a sort of forward-facing flank of our movement, developing in our thinking of inclusivity and justice work.
Yeah, so I just recently last year attended the Disability Summit in Turkey, where I had the opportunity to actually speak upon sex work. I learned so much there. You know, when we talk about disability, we're automatically thinking someone in a wheelchair or someone, you know, amputee or whatnot. And disability comes in many shapes and forms. I think that we all need to know the interpersonal diversity within us all. I feel that it goes hand in hand with mental disability, that our community suffers so much, and it's left untold, right? There's so much undiagnosed people walking around, and it's something that we have to tackle. So I definitely am a big advocate of disability, and just the fight of justice for it all.
I think we've reached a beautiful place in this conversation of kind of bittersweet hope and anxiety. I'm still living with the idea that we can also live, did you say gentle, peaceful lives? That was beautiful, Elisa. Thank you for that. I want to encourage people to look at the events coming up that are being posted in the chat and to follow the links of the organizations represented by our panelists today, and invite you to close, if you would like, well, with two thoughts. One, we've talked locally, we've talked nationally, but Carlo, thank you for reminding us of the international and the wars happening around the world at this time, genocidal and dangerous, and in which in every place there are trans and LGBTQIA people struggling, unseen, and sometimes being part of the pinkwashing that some countries do. And I'm thinking of Israel's attempt to present itself as a progressive democracy, deploying a kind of rainbow flag over occupation. I think we hold in our hearts people on all sides of all of these struggles. But thank you for reminding us that there's a world out there that we're also part of. And I'm excited to hear more about the conference you attended in Turkey, Tati, at some point. I hope I get to hear. As we close, I often ask my guests on the Laura Flanders show, you know, what they think the story will be that the future tells of this moment. This is a long struggle. The end of the story is not written. And we think about our ancestors, and you pointed out, Carlo, we're not even going to be here forever. Shock. What do you think is the story the future will tell of now? Who wants to start? Elisa? You're still muted. So sorry.
What do I think the story, how will the story be told of this moment? You know, it's so hard to answer that question because I feel like so much progress has been erased over the last 4 years. And whether it be someone's, you know, right to choose what to do with their own body, trans rights, LGBTQ rights, the, you know, labor movement, voting rights, there's just been such a mass and fast effort, an effective effort to roll back our rights and to just take us backwards. And it's like you feel whiplash because it's just all happening really quickly and it's hard to process. And I think the story will be told that this is a moment of repeating history, perhaps on steroids to some degree. I think the story about people on the left will be told that we really struggled on how to organize and respond to this moment in an effective way. Some of that is our own infighting. Some of that is people in power and leadership perhaps not really disagreeing much with what people on the right are thinking. Maybe behind closed doors, maybe I don't agree with all those points, but some of them I do. And I think there's an identity crisis happening in terms of politics, American politics. And I think that, whether you're on the right or the left, we're moving further right and further left at the same time. And it's just that weird dichotomy. And so, yeah, I think that's how the story will be told of this moment.
Thank you. Carlo, we have about 3 minutes. Take your half of them.
Well, I hope that the story tells how we came together and organized and were able to gamefully make some progress for our future generations so that young people that are now in high school or even before entering high school can enter those institutions with safety, with what they're supposed to be there to do, which is to learn, right? So, but I think beyond that, also just more solidarity. I feel that there is so much siloing and division, and maybe even the system that we have set up here in the US in terms of funding contributes to that division, I think, a lot of the time. But I think beyond that, I think going back to the basics of organizing. I used to work with Dolores Huerta, so one of her famous models for us was the house meetings. Basic, but so powerful to share space with people. And in our community, a lot of it is folks that we brought into our sphere, to our families, to our home. It's our own family, our own makeup. So I think for us, I would love to see a vision where we feel we can breathe, we can sigh, and not have to worry so much about what's coming.
Sati. What do you
So that
think
is a
will
hard,
be the future tells?
that is a hard question to answer, but I think that Carlos and Elise pretty much hit it on the nose. I will probably just add to that I would love for the story to be told in many different ways, highlighting the new, the new leaders coming up now, the new Marsha P. Johnsons, the new Sylvia Rivera's, for a story to be told after resilience. Hopefully the story is being told after we're liberated and resilient. And, and hopefully the story is being told as to how we got here, and that through the struggle of COVID and through the midst of police brutality, we all became strong and started nonprofit organizations and started grassroots organizing and became a resilience, community who got such and such and overpassed such and such, and they're here today. I'm hoping that that's how the story ends for us, and continues for the rest of our younger generations.
Well, that's a beautiful place to end. Thank you so much. Many stories with smiles and flowers. I think that's good. I'll take it. I appreciate that. Tatiana Fermin, Elisa Crespo, Carlo Gomez Artiaga, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to catch the April CityWorks show, it's on the question of pride at work, and you can hear more about this conversation then and hear some samples from this conversation in that episode of CityWorks, which you can find at CUNY. Our guests have been extraordinary. Thank you again. And I encourage anybody in the audience to check out the links in the chat. Be safe, be well. For the School of Labor and Urban Studies at CUNY, I'm Laura Flanders. Thank you so much for joining us.